Sorry to pull off the mask, but I think maybe I can be a little more understandable this way, and I'm far enough away from you, I hope. But thank you all for being here this evening. The Hill Lecture will begin in just a matter of moments. In the meantime, a couple of preliminary announcements. All our Hill Lectures are published in booklet form. Here's the most recent one available to you at the table in the back, and the others are too. If you see any booklets that have run out that you would like to have, just let me know. We'll send it to you free of charge. The booklets back there are, of course, free of charge. We will have Michael Spector's Hill Lecture published in booklet form a few months after his presentation this evening. And so if you'd like a copy of that, please check with me in the fall. I should mention also, if there are those here who would like to take science writing courses, we have 3 courses in science writing here in the School of Journalism and Electronic Media in the College of Communication and Information. There's a sheet of this color in the back. Please take it with you, and you can talk to Julie Ansager or me about these courses. Happy to talk to you about them. The Hill Lecture will begin just in a matter of moments now. Just time to let some people find some seats, and we'll be underway. And now even a more official good evening and welcome to you all. This is our 29th annual Alfred and Julia Hill Lecture. This lecture series was created by the generosity of Tom Hill and Mary Frances Hill Holton. Their contribution to the School of Journalism and Electronic Media at the University of Tennessee established the Alfred and Julia Hill Lecture Series on the theme of science, society, and the mass media. This endowed lectureship honors the late Mr. Hill's and Mrs. Holton's parents, Alfred and Julia Hill, who founded the Oak Ridger in 1949. In 1969, Tom Hill became publisher of the Oak Ridger and served for 20 years. Mr. Hill and Mrs. Holton were also the principal benefactors of an endowment for the School of Journalism and Electronic Media in 1987 to match state of Tennessee contributions to establish what is now the Julia G. and Alfred G. Hill Chair of Excellence Professorship in Science, Technology, and Medical Writing, and the Science Communication Program at the University of Tennessee. I am most fortunate and most grateful to hold that professorship. We thank Tom Hill and Mary Frances Hill Holton for the Hill Lecture Series, for the professorship they helped to create, for Tom Hill's distinguished service to journalism, and for their great generosity to the University of Tennessee. Tom Hill died in 2019. I just wish it were possible to convey in words what a truly kind, cheerful, gracious, and wise man Tom Hill was. We miss him terribly. We are honored to have with us this evening the Dean of the college in which the Hill Lectures are based. Here is Dr. Joe Mazer, Dean of the College of Communication and Information, and his wife, Chrissy. And I've lost track of where you are, right there in the back. Thank you. We are honored to have with us, too, Dr. Catherine Luther, Director of the School of Journalism and Electronic Media, which is the home of the Hill Lectures and base of our science communication program. Dr. Luther, and where are you? There you are. Thank you. We are also grateful to friends of the Alfred and Julia Hill Lecture Series for their continued support. We would especially like to thank UT Battelle and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory Office of Communications and External Relations. And we thank the Front Page Foundation and the East Tennessee Society of Professional Journalists. We thank the Society for Technical Communication, East Tennessee Chapter. We thank Doctors Mary and Jay Nepper. We thank Pam and Jesse Finney, parents of Joanna Finney, UT class of 2009, in memory of their daughter, and Bill and Linda Cabbage, in memory of Joanna Finney, UT class of 2009. They and we would like to invite all of you to have refreshments with us after the lecture and the question period. And now if I can get my fingers to work. It is my honor to introduce our Hill lecturer this year, Michael Spector. You know something about him from the program note. Science writer for The New Yorker, 8 national and international writing awards, and his book, Denialism, I'll reach for it right here, Denialism, How Irrational Thinking Hinders Scientific Progress, Harms the Planet, and Threatens Our Lives. Consider this book for a moment. It was published in 2009. It covers such topics as vaccine refusal, genetically modified crops, organic food, vitamins and supplements, and synthetic biology. 13 years later, it's still every bit as relevant and frightening as it was when it was published. That's the mark of a remarkable book and a remarkable writer. How did he do that? That's why we brought him here to speak tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, our Hill lecturer, Michael Spector, speaking on Believing Science in an Age of Denial.
Is there a lavalier?
I want to use that.
Hi, thank you. We're just going to play around with the mics for an hour and then we'll be good. Does this one work? No. Okay, guess we'll use this one. Hi. Oh, wait. Can you make that work? Awesome. Oh, you have to turn it on. I never would have thought of that. I'm not that technical. Hello? I'll just put it in my pocket. All right, can I be heard? Too bad. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I'm here just today, and I'm sorry. I wish I could spend a little time here. It's a lovely place. And thank you for that kind introduction, most of which, if not all of which, I do not deserve. It is true that I wrote this book. It's been more than a decade since I published that book, which among other things asked the question, what happens to a society? Am I reverberating? Okay. What'd you say? Oh, wow. People are really on top of shit here. All right. Volume. No volume. Oh, maybe a 2. How's that? No. Hello? Is that better? Wait, someone's coming down to help me. Oh, the other mic is on. Let's turn it off. How about now? Okay, I'll turn it back. You guys are a tough audience. How's this? Okay, this is not going to have been worth all this, I promise you. But okay, yell at me if there's reverb. I wrote that book because I asked the question, what happens to a society that accepts denialism as a way of life? Another word for denialism in this context, of course, is lies. I never wanted to write that book. I mean, for one thing, I'm a journalist and we never want to do anything. But more than that, I didn't want the issue to be important enough to warrant my sustained attention. I put it off for years, hoping that if I ignored the problem, it would go away. There must be a name for that kind of unwillingness to acknowledge reality. I'm not sure what it would be, but I'll have to think. Finally, though, I felt as if a society needed to make critical choices that I had thought were obvious, but clearly they were not. It was a problem, but I certainly never thought we might see denialism as a way of life, or find out so clearly or so soon that what that might mean in this country. At the time, I was animated by the growing number of people who, when confronted with an unpleasant reality, chose to embrace a more comfortable lie. We all do that. We all do that. Denial is a common way for individuals to react to terrible news, to deal with harsh truths. If your mother died, your girlfriend dumped you, your job has been outsourced, it's not a terrible thing to be in denial a little bit. It's a coping mechanism, and for an individual, it can work briefly. Denialism, however, is something else. It's a society's reaction to an issue they do not want to confront. As an example, just as a random example, which is responsible, I think, for many people dying in this country, when Donald Trump repeatedly refused to test people for COVID, as if not testing meant nobody would get sick. If we don't test them, how can they be sick? But denialism stems from other things as well. Suspicions about vaccines in general, dread of GMOs, even confusion about climate scientists. This is not even or principally a scientific issue. It's not a wing issue, right or left. Everyone shares this problem, which brings me to today. I'm honored that you invited me here, but to be honest, I'd be way more delighted if the topic of this speech were no longer of interest to anyone. Naturally, it would have been impossible to believe a decade ago how rapidly we managed to strip our society of its reliance on science and facts. I couldn't have guessed it, and I'm a pretty dark guy. We can start with the obvious, the COVID vaccines. We are 1 year into the largest and most aggressive vaccine campaign in the history of humanity. And as of last week, more than 10 billion shots have been administered around the world. More than 500 million in this country alone. In America, if you've been vaccinated and received a booster, your risk of dying or being hospitalized is 90 to 93% lower than the risk of those who are not fully vaccinated. 93%. That's like a big number. This happens, to my mind, to be the greatest scientific story of our time, one of the greatest ever. No vaccine has ever been produced this rapidly. Many of you are aware, the fastest vaccine that has ever been made in history was 4 years. That was just one. Usually there's 6 years. Few have ever been as effective as this one, and none has a better safety profile. I could be wrong. I've never heard of a single person dying as a result of receiving this vaccine. 16 million people so far have died of COVID. I don't know 3 people who've died from the vaccine. I'd have to see the data. You can show it to me. I mean, people get anaphylactic shock, but that's why when you get the vaccine, you're told to stay there because there's an easy way to deal with that. And by the way, 3 versus 16 million, I'm going to go with the 3. But it's a triumph, and it isn't, because yesterday 2,000 people died. Today 2,000 people died. Tomorrow 2,000 people are going to die. And this has been going on for months. This is like 6 fully occupied Boeing 777 airliners falling out of the sky every day. And most of us really don't seem to care. If you count accurately, at least 1 million Americans have died. Some are old and frail. Some have conditions that prevent vaccines from robustly defending them. But the vast Majority of those people are unvaccinated. Astonishing to me that this would be an issue. More astonishing are the lies about vaccines and masks in the political tenor of the debate. It's really, when you step back and think about it, it's almost breathtaking. Why is this happening? Well, there are a variety of reasons. Denialism is often based on fear. And fear deserves to be taken seriously. We don't take it seriously enough, and that's a mistake. I have a lot more sympathy today than I used to for people who are dubious about the rules of organized medicine, who are worried about the health of their infant children or skeptical about the interests of the corporations that make so many of our seeds and food. We like to think that reason is a sort of unimpeachable good. If we have the facts, we have a winner. That's the way I have always seen the world. That's the way I was brought up and educated. I don't know where or when I first read Milton, but I was young and I've forgotten pretty much all of it. But I have remembered this one quote. It was written 350 years ago, and I've always remembered it, and I don't know why. I'm not going to give you the exact quote. My Middle English isn't as good as it used to be, but I'll paraphrase. He basically wrote, "If truth is on the battlefield, then nothing else should matter. Let truth and falsehood grapple, because whoever knew truth to lose a battle." John Milton never met Donald Trump, and he never lived in the post-truth world we occupy today, because I believed that when I wrote this book that was true, and I don't believe it anymore. Truth doesn't always win, and lots of times it loses, and that's a horrible thing to have to stand up here and say. Trump is easy to blame for a lot of the pain we have endured. How much can you expect from people whose leaders tell them to treat a virus by shooting bleach into their veins, or that tests only serve to highlight the number of infections, as if no test and no knowledge would make them go away? But Trump and people like him are more a symptom of a disease than its cause. And it's worth noting that although we are living in an age of unimaginable scientific achievement, our elected leaders rank among the most arrogant and thoughtless denialists ever to have entered public life. We have crossed some unforeseen threshold into a space where facts mean nothing. They mean nothing. When leading officials say that what happened on January 6, 2020, when people were killed as a mob stormed the Capitol of the United States, when those people are that event has been referred to as a legitimate form of political discourse. If we believe that, we have a really big problem. And we should not be surprised if people don't believe in science or scientists, because they don't believe in anything. Why should they believe in science? Why is science special? When words like science and progress become unmoored from their meaning, the effects are disastrous. And let's not kid ourselves. Those words today are under assault with a ferocity we have not seen for hundreds of years. I've learned patiently, sometimes usually painfully, that reason and education don't always work. They are not enough. Truth doesn't always win, but it does go further in confronting the fears that bolster denialism than self-satisfied condescension. We are often told, by me, among others, but particularly by people like Steven Pinker in books like Enlightenment Now, that we are living in the best of all possible times. Numerically, that can't be disputed. The world is less violent, healthier, more prosperous than it has ever been. The poorest among us live longer and live better by a long shot. Now, I'm not saying things are great. I'm just comparatively speaking, and it's remarkable. My grandfather died at the age of 66. When he did, it's too bad, but no one said, "How could you die at 66? I'm 67, and I really don't intend to die this week. And if I did, that would seem unusual, because we don't die at the age of 67 these days unless we have a particular illness. That happened in 50 years. We've gone from Social Security, 65, you get a year of it and then you die, to you live a really long time. That is a remarkable thing. And, it's important to keep that in mind. Death rates that were just completely normal 2 generations ago would horrify us now. And the reason for that is science. and science alone. That is why it's really so heartbreaking to stand on the precipice of what seems like a very dark ravine. And if we are not particularly vigilant, we're going to plunge into it, and maybe we already have begun. What happens when we believe lies instead of facts? How damaging is that? Well, I think it's pretty clear. People die. In this country, in the past 2 years, while the numbers are not yet perfectly worked out, it is obvious that hundreds of thousands of people have died because of the lies they were told and believed. There's a long history of this. We certainly saw it in South Africa during the AIDS epidemic, when Thabo Mbeki killed hundreds of thousands of his citizens by refusing to accept the scientific approach to treating HIV. He refused antiretroviral medicine, relied on lemon, beetroot, and garlic, and people died in droves. Climate change, people refused to accept reality there. Many local officials, elected officials, federal officials, and people who fund them just won't hear about these problems, and it's already begun to have a tremendously grave impact on the world. And climate change, it's not going to kill us in this room. It's going to destroy the people who always get screwed over. It's going to destroy the poorest people in the world who don't have dams and don't have water supplies and rely on rain and rely on temperate weather, which they won't get. We'll be screwed in a way because you can't grow wheat in Kansas anymore. You have to grow it in Canada. Annoying, but no one's starving as a result of that. But the people who die constantly at an early age because they don't have food and they don't have more than $1 a day to spend on their life, they're the ones who are going to get punished. And I don't think people care very much about that, to be honest. I believe that is a bigger problem even than our political class seems to think it is, because lying begets lying and creates a world where lying is normal. It's not punished. It's not thought of as wrong, even, by many people. For years, we have marched rapidly in the direction of embracing fantasy. A few years ago, in one of his many brilliant insights, the famous scientist Stephen Colbert made up a term, truthiness. Truthiness suggests there is something real about an assertion. It doesn't have to be true, literally. It just has to kind of feel true. It has to have the ring of truth. And that's what people go on these days. But truth has a painful edge. To face the truth, even in this place of rational thought and devotion to learning, we would have to accept that we live in a country where more people believe that angels are real than believe that life on Earth can be explained by evolution, random mutation, and natural selection. I don't want to dwell on the fact that this is a very real problem in the state where we are located, as is the banning of books. I feel the need to mention it, but believe me, I am well aware that Tennessee is no anomaly in this regard. How did this begin, or how did it accelerate? I don't know, I have a few ideas. I think George Bush began the current war against science, at least in its public face. And in saying that, in trashing him, I should say, his AIDS program in Africa, PEPFAR, was the most successful foreign relief medical program this country has ever had. So I got to give him credit for that. But he did things like oppose HPV vaccines, which is a cancer prevention vaccine. The Bush administration decided that facts, in the trenchant words of David Byrne, the lead singer of the Talking Heads once upon a time, facts all come with a point of view. So it doesn't really matter whether yours, it's just a point of view. It's just different than mine. The problem for the Bush people with an HPV vaccine was really simple. Sex was bad, and nothing that even theoretically encouraged it, safe sex practices, vaccines, etc., would be encouraged. Bush administration's officials removed fact sheets that promoted the use of condoms from a CDC website, and they replaced it with one denigrating condoms. This is the government of the United States doing this, and the guy's name wasn't even Donald Trump. I've said this before, and I'm sorry we can't test the theory yet, but when there's an AIDS vaccine, something to prevent the most deadly epidemic of modern mankind, there will be a furious battle in this country to prevent children from receiving it. You can hear it from the halls of Congress now. It will encourage people to have sex before marriage, and we're not going to pay for that. This is craziness. This is really craziness. This has a direct impact on American medicine, research, and health. And I'm not just talking about funding issues that are frightening. I don't know who here is a postdoc or a PhD person or a scientist, but do you want to be a public servant after watching illiterate morons on Capitol Hill attack Tony Fauci for trying to do public service for 50 years? He now has to walk around with a team of Secret Service guards, and so do his daughters who don't live near him and don't participate in public anything. I should say here, many of you know this, I'm not unbiased on the subject of Fauci. I've known him for 40 years. I've written about him. I did an audiobook about him. I like him. He never lied to me. He's an honest, hardworking guy. He's a political animal. You don't operate from Ronald Reagan to Joe Biden without being one. But I don't know of any time he told a lie. If he couldn't tell me something, he would say so. He tried to get information out. It's what he's done during this pandemic. And he's been vilified as Mengele for it. That's just one guy. How are you going to tell your kid to go do that for a living if that's the result? And I should point out the obvious. Fauci could have cashed out years ago for zillions of dollars. He gets paid well. I'm sure he's happy. But he could get paid 10, 20 times what he gets paid if that's what he cared about. He doesn't. He's a public servant. There's a lot of public servants out there. They want to help. People are making it really hard to help, and that's tragic. At some point, and I don't know exactly when, science came to be seen as a political entity, purely a political thing, like the teachers' union or the truckers' union, Teamsters. Scientific information was considered to come from an opinion group, like teachers, like truckers, like accountants, whatever lobby you think of. Scientists are just another lobby. And this is a radical change from the way it has always been in this country. 50 years ago, actually 60 now practically, more, in the wake of Sputnik, President Eisenhower, a Republican, created the post of presidential science advisor. He appointed the Harvard chemist George Kistiakowsky. Jerome Weissner, a Democrat, would become his deputy, and he eventually became the president of MIT. He sat on the advisory committee, and they met often with Kennedy. With Eisenhower. The next year, John F. Kennedy, a Democrat and a man Eisenhower couldn't stand, became president. Guess what happened in the science advisor's office? Kistiakowsky and Weissner switched jobs. The deputy became the director became the deputy. Could you imagine that happening? Today, they would kill the director if they could. It's just mind-boggling. But why shouldn't that happen? These guys are scientists. Molecules don't have politics. They don't vote. Today, we have another kind of space race, if you want to think of it that way. Some people call it Sputnik 2. It's a race with China for the dominance in the world of gene editing and synthetic technology. And we are creating a world that is dangerously close to being number 2. Because they're focused, they're moving forward. And we're not moving forward with the same endeavors, commitment, and finance. Now, part of China's charm is that their military, their academic world, and their business is all one thing. That's called totalitarianism, but it's useful if you want to get something done. I'm not urging that. But I really wish we could focus on the things we're good at and be excited about them instead of having people protest them. And to some degree, I'm talking about mRNA technology. What happened? So why on earth would a group like you need to invite someone to talk about the fear of the truth and the merger of lies and facts that threaten our society? Well, there's probably more innovation going on in creative clusters like the one in this town than there was in the entire country 50 years ago. It's astonishing. The implications and possibilities of gene editing and synthetic biology in particular are breathtaking. So are the dangers that they pose. It is really, the more powerful we come, the closer we come to being able to design and recreate the world, the more responsibility we have to do it right. And I'm not sure that we will do it right. But when you look at the science of it, it's not, it seems brand new, but it's a continuation of the modern world, which has been defined by scientific enterprise more than it's been defined by anything else. Independent inquiry, observation, questions, and doubt. Doubt is great. Skepticism is essential. But I'm afraid that at a certain point, when you're presented with data that is overwhelming, you need to accept the data, and people refuse to do that today. And what's happening, I fear we are losing the thing that has made us great, which is the Enlightenment. I think we're losing it. The Enlightenment wasn't really about politics, it was about science. It was about data observation change that dictated the progress of, for instance, the 20th century. The Enlightenment won World War II. At least so far, that may have changed this afternoon. I believe it's prevented World War III. So there will always be scientific debate, often very heated and sometimes worse than that. But there was never really confusion about the process, about how to do it. There was debate about to what purpose, who should control it. Those things are powerful, they always will be, and they're difficult to resolve, but they're legitimate issues of debate. Often today, the lies and the distortion of reality are subtle. They're not even that clear. And in some ways, that worries me the most. And so it makes you wonder what to think about scientific authorities. I'll give you an example. For the first time in 20 years this year, the FDA approved a new drug for Alzheimer's patients. My dad died of Alzheimer's, my mother has it, and I'm keenly aware of the problem and would love for better treatments. The drug they approved was unanimously rejected by the advisory committee that recommends these things. No drug has ever been approved by the FDA that has been unanimously rejected by its advisory committee. But the FDA wanted to win. They wanted to say, hey, we're approving this cool new mechanism. It is a cool new mechanism. It just actually has one problem, which is it doesn't work. But that's okay, because they approved it and it cost $56,000 a year, and they were encouraging Medicaid to spend that money and Medicare to spend that money because we know we have an endless amount of money to spend on things that don't work. And an interesting thing happened. The Mayo Clinic said, no, we're not going to use that drug. And the Cleveland Clinic said it, and New York Presbyterian said it, a lot of great hospitals. And my initial reaction to that was, yay. You know, the good guys are going to stand up and not do this shit. And then I had another thought. What does it mean when our main agency, which has been created to protect us from bad medicine, from snake oil salesmen and liars, is rejected by the people that serve us, the hospitals, the medical profession? What does it mean when we can't even trust them to approve a drug that we want to use? Because now, maybe they're going to approve a drug next year that's great, and maybe Columbia Presbyterian will say, nah. And they'll have every right to say nah, because this year's one sucked, and they were right to reject it. And so to live in a world where we now have to worry about the people that I at least used to look up to and respect, it's in some ways more punishing than just dealing with a straight-out, crazy, anti-science lunatic. I feel emotional about that, but there are many other examples. And I think this is what happens when we become indifferent to facts. I'll give you another example, which won't seem as big a deal to you, but I live in upstate New York. The county I live in is literally the epicenter of Lyme disease in the United States. Yay. And Lyme disease is a big problem, and you probably already know that. There have been a lot of efforts to figure out the best way to treat Lyme disease, and it's complicated. And one of the things people wanted to do was give IV antibiotics for 3 weeks to people. And they tried that. They tried it a lot. There's been a bunch of studies. It's never worked. It's caused infections. It's caused a couple deaths. But it's never cured anyone. The New York State Legislature, up in arms about Lyme, passed a law saying you have to pay. Doctors have to prescribe and insurance companies have to pay for IV treatment for Lyme disease. So great. We now have a law ordering doctors to do stuff that could kill patients and that clearly won't help them. And that is a country we live in. And that's not as evil as some of the stuff I began talking about, but it's more, in many ways more pernicious, because these are the people we have to rely on. If I go to a doctor and he says, I want to give you an IV for your problem, and I then look up and say, that killed 17 people and never cured anyone, I'm not going to feel good about that. And that just shouldn't happen. But this is, I think, what happens when we become indifferent to facts. We are at war over face masks. I don't even know how to deal with that. Mandatory vaccination. I'll be honest with you on mandatory vaccination. People say it's their right not to vaccinate themselves, vaccinate their kids. I agree. Let them stay home. Culling the herd is a thing that happens in all species. People die. They want to die, they can die. But they shouldn't go near my kid. They shouldn't be in my office. They shouldn't be in the grocery store where I shop. They shouldn't be allowed to do that because we live in a society. It's not 320 million individual people. It's a society. And we're acting, many of us, like it's 320 million individual people. And that is horrifying. I mean, this debate is just crazy. But it's an emotional one. We're having it. People get emotional about the things they care about. And sometimes it just creates some crazy problems. Ingrid Newkirk is the head of the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And a few years ago, 10 years now, more, she offered $1 million to any group or individual who could make chicken in a lab by growing cells that tastes as good as chicken running around in your yard. So you guys all know that $1 million buys like pencils, but it's a start, it's publicity, and it did start things, and there were lots of people doing it, and we do it now. Do you know what the response of the rank and file from PETA was to this? They went crazy. Ingrid is a total fascist dictator. I like her, but she is a fascist. So she couldn't be overthrown. But she would have been if they could, because they hated it. They hated it because the idea of people striving to eat something like meat that they enjoyed to taste appalled them. And Ingrid rightly said, hey, why are we doing this? We're doing this because we don't think you should kill animals or mistreat animals or live in a way that disregards most of the species on Earth. It has nothing to do with taste buds. Ingrid's like, let's grow whatever we can grow and eat it. I mean, Jesus. I thought it was amazing that that group opposed it, and as I say, she won. I'm going to give you, I think I talked too long, and I know you want to ask questions. I just want to say a couple other things, and I'm going to give you one other example, which is I wrote a story about 6 years ago about an attempt to introduce genetically modified mosquitoes in South Florida because the Aedes aegypti mosquito was carrying, as it always has, dengue. And dengue has been out of this country for a long time, but it had come back. And Key West was hit bad. It's a tourist place. That's how they make their money, and no one was going there because you could go to the Bahamas where they didn't have it. Why would you do that? So some entomologists from Oxford said, we have this plan. We'll make genetically modified mosquitoes. When they mate, their eggs die. So they can't prosper, and you can't get dengue. They were doing this in Brazil. I went down to Brazil. The Brazilians were grateful. It seemed to be working. So they set up a panel in Key West, and I went to it. I think it's on the internet. It's a crazy thing. So Key West is a place where kind of like rich hippies live. And they all drove up in their Lexuses because it was before Tesla. And one after the other, they got up and denounced these entomologists as corporate creeps who were trying to take over their world and introduce these evil things. Do you know what they ended up doing and what they still do to this day in Key West to deal with this problem? They dump DuPont chemicals in their backyard. That's better, apparently. They dump chemicals, they kill animals and pets and destroy all sorts of grasses and flowers because biology was so devastatingly dangerous and so redolent of the evils of places like Monsanto that they couldn't even stand it. This is so depressing. I just want to end with, I have a lot more to say, but I'm not going to say it all. I do want to just tell you about one thing that makes me cheerful. And it's about a guy who was as unlike me as any person could be. He was famously anti-abortion. In fact, he was the most famous anti-abortion advocate in America, and he got Christian evangelists onto the bandwagon. He was as right-wing as you could be. Ronald Reagan appointed him Surgeon General because he was so happy to have a guy who hated abortion and hated homosexuals and all these things in office. The liberals in Congress, his name was Everett Koop. Liberals in Congress opposed his appointment for a year, and they finally just gave up because they thought, who knows the name of a Surgeon General? They don't do anything, fuck it. So he became Surgeon General, and the Republicans were really happy, and the first thing they did was say to him, do a giant report on AIDS. So he went out and did a giant report on AIDS, and he came back, and he recommended that by the time everyone was in third grade, they should know how to use a condom, put a condom on, what a condom was. And the people who had brought him to office, like their heads were spinning off their shoulders. My head was too. I mean, it was crazy. He's a big guy. He looked like Abe Lincoln, and he had that beard, and I spent a lot of time with him. He was very imposing. So everyone was pissed off among the people who loved him, but they gave him another chance. He was the most famous anti-abortion advocate in America, so Reagan said, do a report on abortion, on the perils of abortion. So he went out for a year and he interviewed hundreds of people. And one day, his chief of staff called me and said, you need to come see Koop. I was working at the Washington Post then. I said, why? He said, well, it's about the abortion report. I said, oh, finally. He said, he's not going to issue it. I said, what? He said, he's not going to bring one out. I said, when can I see him? He said, come now. So I went to his office. I said, Mr. Surgeon General, what's the deal? He said, you know, I interviewed hundreds of people, and I came away with the realization that I couldn't say that it was always right to have the baby or always wrong to have an abortion, that it depended on the facts. And I can't issue a report saying anything else, so I'm not going to issue one. I'm like, okay, I need to lie down, thank you. When Koop left Congress, Henry Waxman, who is 5'5" and was the head of the health subcommittee and the most liberal guy in Congress, he hated Koop. He tried everything he could to keep Koop from going into that job. Koop he wrote a memoir, and he gave it to Henry, and he signed it to the biggest man in Congress. And Henry loved Koop. Everyone who hated Koop loved him. Everyone who loved him wanted him dead. And I saw him right before he died. He died at the age of 96, and I saw him when I was writing this book, and I said, I don't get you, dude. He said, my spots have not changed. I still believe the things I've always believed. But data is data, and opinions are opinions, and you can't graft opinions onto data. And I just thought, so one antediluvian guy believed in reality. It can happen. I sometimes think about writing a book about the guy, like the last great ideologue. But I just end with that because some people are reasonable. didn't believe in homosexuality, thought it was an abomination, but he also understood that viruses are viruses and they don't choose which cells to enter based on sexual preference. He didn't believe in abortion personally, but he knew that forcing people to have carry a baby to term was going to be very punishing to a lot of people in a lot of societies. And you got to love that, and you got to hope for that. So I do think those people are out there. Even though I probably gave you 27 minutes of negativity, you should take away the last 3. And I'm good to answer any questions or talk about anything anybody wants to. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
I have a question about sci-fi movies and ethical science movies. I'm thinking specifically of Gattaca when I'm saying this. Do you think that they've done more harm in the fact that they kind of spur reasons for denialism, or do you think that they've brought to light more ethical facts that people need to take into consideration?
I don't think they've done harm. Gattaca, I've used Gattaca in classes. I don't do it anymore because it's a cliche, but it's real. Go look at it. Those things are almost all true now. I don't see how you can say stuff like that does harm. If it gets people thinking about these issues, they're hard issues. And we didn't talk tonight about what to do about gene editing and social justice and who's going to make decisions about what gets done. But those are important things, and I'd be happy to see someone make a movie out of it. I mean, I don't know how to, but someone must. I don't think that's a bad thing. I kind of feel like any rational attempt to address any of these issues is a good thing.
Thank you.
Oh, hi. Do you believe that the internet is responsible, at least partially, for all the misinformation that spread this last decade?
Yes. Do I have to say more, or can I go home? Yeah, the internet is... So I wrote the earliest long story about Google. And when I did, I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. I mean, what could be bad? It's pure democracy. Everyone's going to have knowledge. Who can want more? And I kind of almost still believe that about Google. But I hate Facebook, and I have to be honest with you. I don't think that those 7 people who started those companies, I don't think anyone, including them, ever thought, gee, we're going to have more power than all the kings that ever lived in the history of humanity. But they do. And so, yeah, the things Facebook in particular have done are atrocious. I'm not saying Google hasn't done bad things. I think they've tried a little harder. But yeah, I mean, do I think the internet is a bad thing? No, I think it's a net good overall. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot of bad associated with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. How are you?
Good.
It's a really nice talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you sort out? I'm trying to think how to say this. We tend to fall back on denialism because it's an easy category to jump on, and of course, I certainly believe that President Trump made it okay. I don't think he changed a lot of things in human nature. That the people were always out there ready to do something. But he made it okay to do that.
Yeah.
But there is also a political expediency and an economic expediency on the part of various parties to engender denialism. For example, I don't think we ever believed that energy companies disbelieve climate change. They've known for a long time about it, but it was economically expedient to engender climate change, as it was for politicians, particularly conservatives, to engender denialism about climate change in order to create votes. I don't think that all of the members of Congress in the conservative wing, if not most of them, really disbelieve that January 6th was anything short of an insurrection or something similar. But it's politically expedient to say that publicly. So how do you, I don't have an answer. How do you sort out
Oh,
the
no
two
problem.
issues?
I have the answers.
What's that?
You're right. I guess what I would say about that stuff is you can work hard at doing battle on the terms that people need to do battle on. When it comes to energy and the environment, I've often thought We can create millions of good jobs in wind, solar, in bioengineering, bioengineering bacteria. We can do that. We can replace fossil fuels. There is a fossil fuel lobby. There is a predilection to do what you've always done. But I think if you go to places and sell the positive and convince them that they're going to be replaced by something better, the problem is what often happens is you take away the old job and you never give them anything else, and they hate you. And I don't blame them. But I guess I feel like, I won't say that when truth is on the field it wins, but we could give it a better try. And, I think a lot of climate change stuff has just been people screaming at each other. It's a very complicated and difficult thing to convince people that something they can't see and may never see is critically important to the future of the world. But we should have leaders who are up to that task. And we should demand that we do, and we don't. We don't demand that. And we shouldn't award easy, we award people for using coal and using gas, and we still give subsidies for all that shit. And we shouldn't. And that means, what do you have to do? You have to elect people who care about these things. And again, I understand what's going on with voting rights, but I also feel like if everyone voted, if they actually voted, these wouldn't be such big problems, because most people don't believe that. Most people, including Republicans, believe a woman should have a right to an abortion. Most people, including Republicans, believe that a clean climate is better and that climate change is real. But you have to go elect people. And we have 40%, 50%, 60% at best who vote. And I kind of feel like you don't want to vote. Don't blame. Who are you going to blame that there's like 11 Supreme Court justices who want women dead? Go vote, and then they won't be there. It's easy for me to say that, but I do think it's true. And I don't know an easier or better way to do it. Wow, we're picking up. It's sort of like an auction.
On a more detailed point, it seems to me that there is so much misuse of the word theory
Of the word
theory, like conspiracy theorists,
Yeah.
Well,
like the
those are
theory
not
of
theories at all. They are suppositions. They're not even a hypothesis that you can test most of the time. And so when you hear people talk about theories, they kind of say, well, there's this theory of plate tectonics, so that must be somebody's best guess. There's this theory of climate change, so that must just be some guess. There's, the theory of evolution. Well, clearly that's just a guess. So, there's not even that basic understanding of what science is that sometimes to me is a problem.
What words mean. We're supposed to have schools. You need to teach people what words mean. It's not that sophisticated an idea to get over to people that the theory of evolution is actually evolution, and that the theory talks about the history of it and the ideas that went into it. But you have to do that. You have to do a lot of things we take for granted that you don't have to do in school. I didn't say this in the talk I said it this afternoon with the students. I think education is the biggest problem, and we need to change it fundamentally. And we particularly need to have every kid in America take statistics at a very early age. And then they should take, I dissected frogs in my science class. They should be dissecting worms. They should be making worms glow the color of their choice. They should be inserting cold genes. It's not that hard to do. And then they'd come home saying, wow, this is super awesome. My generation is just afraid of genetics. And we're not going to do it. We just have to die for anything good to happen. But the younger people aren't like that. We can help them. But we got to teach them for what it's worth. Yes, whoever.
Hi. Do you believe that it's in human nature to always deny the facts, or do you believe in a kind of a utopian place that can exist realistically in which there is no denial and no misinformation?
I'm a journalist. I'm not like a visionary. human nature is complicated. I think a lot of people want to avoid bad things, but I also think people want to understand. I believe the truth is usually better for most people, and I think people want what's better. I mean, is it better not to be vaccinated and die, or is it better to be vaccinated? I mean, I have an opinion there. I just think we need to teach people the truth in ways that don't make them crazy. And we're not very good at that. And by we, I often mean journalists, but also science teachers. I don't have a great answer to that. It's above my head, really. Wish I did.
Hi. So my question kind of concerns the outlier scientists that a lot of people use to justify their denialism. And you have sort of notable examples of famous scientists who have made some discovery. I'm thinking mainly like Francis Crick has had some very problematic views. And while it doesn't diminish their original...
Crick doesn't, I think you're thinking of Watson.
I could look it up, but I thought it was Crick. But
I don't know of any objectional views he had.
Eugenics type problematic views.
Not Francis.
But there have been other scientists as well that have, either sort of quote unquote sold out and have done stuff like climate change denialism, even shilling for the tobacco industry. And denialists use them as sort of the figurehead for being like, well, see, not all scientists agree, and this is our guy. Yeah. So what's sort of the counter to that?
Okay, let's look at tobacco. Who smokes now? Who in this room smokes cigarettes? What? What's happening? There are all these really well-paid guys saying that it's not that bad. So on some level, you can get information across. It's like, yeah, there are some people who will take money and lie, and there are people who have bad motives, but the truth kind of does emerge, and I don't see a lot of people smoking anymore, and I think that's because the message got out that it kills people. So I think in the end, if you're armed with a powerful message, you're gonna win eventually. It just might be longer than you'd like, for what it's worth. Yep. Hi.
Hi. Since you were invited to the Hill lecture, I know you must have a pretty good opinion about things. So just solely on your opinion and all the people that you've interviewed over the years, what are you most hopeful about?
Who, like what person or?
Anything. What are you most hopeful about now?
The future of life. I mean, we have these amazing tools at our disposal. mRNA vaccines are going to get rid of all sorts of diseases. Synthetic biology is going to make it possible to fix a lot of terrible things. There are going to be a lot of questions along the way and a lot of decisions. But we have the tools at our disposal to make life better for humans and for many other species. And that's fantastic, and that wasn't true until recently. So I'm hopeful about the future of life, despite anything I may have said tonight. That was just to earn money. I really wish you hadn't asked me that. Because I have very mixed feelings. I mean, first of all, I think scientists are people, so that if they want to express their opinions on things important to them, they ought to be able to. I wrote a piece, which is out there floating on the internet, denouncing the march against science in Washington. Because who needed a bunch of scientists to march past Donald Trump's house and say, we believe in science? I wanted them all to go in little clusters to places in rural Arkansas and Tennessee and Mississippi and Maine and wherever and talk about vaccines or just go talk to normal people. That would be a march for science that would be worth it. So I think it's fine for scientists to exercise their right of free speech, but I sometimes think they hurt themselves by doing so. I mean, I also got a lot of hate mail for that piece. Not as much as I usually get, and I didn't get a single death threat, which is unusual. But I'm getting a lot of death threats lately because of this thing that happened with me and Fauci and others. Do we have time to say that?
Go ahead, and we'll close with that.
Okay, I just want to tell you this super light anecdote. 2 years ago, I wrote a report. I'm on some exalted vaccine commission, and every year we look at something, and that year we looked at how do we make a flu vaccine that works, that's universal and lasts forever. And I wrote a report about it, and then we had a public forum that consisted of me and Fauci and Peggy Hamburg, who was head of the FDA, and Rick Bright, who was the head of BARDA before Trump fired him for being good at his job, and a couple other people. And we were trying to figure out the problem of how do you get, say we know how to make a universal vaccine for influenza, which we kind of almost do now, involving mRNA technology. But you have this problem, which is that all these companies make millions of dollars every year giving mediocre vaccines. Go to Merck and say, hey, you know what? We'd like you to stop giving the shit vaccine every year and instead give one vaccine for life. And by the way, can you spend $350 million helping to develop it? And they're going to say, nope, we're not going to do that. So I said in this thing, what do we have to do to make this happen? Blow up the system? So that was Alex Jones. Does everyone know who he is? So Alex Jones, may he rot in hell, and that's an official comment. His producers saw this. It was on C-SPAN for 2 years, like 7,000 people, like some lonely graduate students and mRNA technology people saw it. His producer said, oh my God, this is the smoking gun of COVID. They have a 1-hour special broadcast, emergency broadcast, to release the news that I and Fauci and others stopped the seasonal flu from happening that year and replaced it with COVID. You didn't know I was this powerful. With COVID, because we wanted the world to be addicted to mRNA technology. And let me tell you something. You can laugh at this. I did. I got a lot of death threats. That has been seen about 3 million times. The original thing was seen about 3 times. They went into my Wikipedia page and said I was part of a cabal to do this. And you're not allowed, it's like bad form to rewrite your Wikipedia, but I have a lot of graduate students, so I made one of them do it. But he couldn't take it out, he just had to rewrite it. And there was a whole Reuters story debunking it, so we put that in. But, that's what we're dealing with. That's the world we live in. And, Fauci I got some death threats. I don't think anyone's going to really drive to upstate New York and kill me. It's just not worth it. But Fauci has serious problems. This is craziness. So, I don't know. I wanted to end on a happy note. Anyway, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it.
And again, thanks to all of you folks